welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today I have another special guest episode. And I feel like I start all these exactly the same. I'm so excited to share this one with you, but I'm so excited to share this one with you. I had an absolutely amazing conversation with Kate LaSala. Kate is a dog trainer who specializes in dogs with anxiety, fear, and aggression, and she is a pet death doula. What? So you can see why I was so excited to converse with her. We had such a phenomenal conversation, and I was excited to learn all about end-of-life work with pets, which I have assisted some people with helping to transition their pets and themselves, their own emotional journey with transitioning their pets. But there is so much more to it than this, and I'm going to let her tell you all about it. So I'm going to stop talking right here about that, and you can listen in. I'm just so excited for you to listen to this. Kate is such an amazing human being with an amazing story. I'm saying amazing a lot. With a great story about how she came to where she is in her work with pets. And I did have another episode way back at the beginning of my show about pet loss. So feel free to check that one out too. But this one goes really into depth with so much around any loss involving a pet. So I'm, again, super excited for this one. Now, before we dive in, as always, please head on over to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. If you would like to see the video conversation of Kate and I, you can do that there. And you can get early access to my podcast. You get grief affirmations and all sorts of other bonus content as I come up with them. For as little as $1 a month, you can support me. And all the money I receive through Patreon goes to a special fund or line item in my budget, as it were, for me to provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. And I do have somebody I have been working with who is able to benefit from my help. And that is all thanks to my patrons. And I'll give you a shout out here on the podcast if you want. Happy to do that. You know what? I have a new patron. Her name's Chrissy. She told me I didn't have to do a shout out, but I'm doing it anyway. Hi, Chrissy. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. You can get a shout out and just be honored to know that you're helping to support me. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to stop talking now so you can hear this really cool conversation with Kate LaSala. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I am super excited to have another amazing guest on my show, Miss Kate LaSala. Kate, would you take a moment, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. I am a multi-credentialed behavior consultant for dogs. I specialize in fear, aggression, reactivity, and separation anxiety. I work exclusively on Zoom, so I help dogs and their people worldwide. I am also a companion animal death doula, and through my behavior practice, I help clients navigate stigmatized losses like behavioral euthanasia, rehoming, surrendering. Also on my blog, I do a weekly blog post, a newsletter, and a ton of social media content. But through my blog, I've been chronicling my own grief journey of losing my soul dog, Boo Boo, 6.5 months ago. On there, I also maintain sort of a living directory of pet loss resources and at-home euthanasia directory of local vets who offer that service.
That's awesome. I love that. And now my listeners know why I wanted to have you on my show so bad.
Spoiler alert.
I know, spoiler alert. No. Yeah, I was very enthralled to learn more about your work as a pet death doula, because I've had people ask me before. I get so many questions as a death doula, like, do you work with kids? You work with this, and a lot of people have asked me, have you ever worked with pets? And I have, but I haven't. Like I personally I've worked with people who have an elderly pet or a very ill pet that are going to lose them more on their grief than their pet. I kind of played death doula for my soul cat when she had her week, because we did at home euthanasia, and I planned out her last couple days to be like her perfect days. So it felt good to do that and give her some space. Anyway, so how long have you've been at least a dog trainer of some form or shape for quite some time, correct?
Yeah, almost a decade as a dog trainer. A little over 2 years ago, we lost our dog, Mr. Barbo, and he was sort of the impetus of me becoming a pet death doula. We had two dogs at the time. We had Mr. Barbo and Boo Boo, my soul dog, and he passed away at 13. And when he died, it was a hard loss, but I knew his loss was not going to be anything compared to when we eventually would lose Boo Boo. So losing Barbo was sort of the impetus for me to get into pet death doula work. Around that same time, I had been getting clients coming back to me because I've been doing training for almost a decade. I've some of those dogs are nearing, the end of their
Yeah. Oh,
lives.
yeah.
And after working with behavior cases, because I do fear and aggression mostly, I really get to know my clients. They become, friends, they become part of my family. And those clients started returning back to me saying, Fluffy, we think maybe she's not having a good quality of life and we trust you and we know you care about her and can you help us navigate that? And I was really feeling like I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to effectively do that. And then through my behavior practice, unfortunately, a percentage of people I work with, because it's fear and aggression, they decide behavioral euthanasia is the most humane option for the animal, or that they have to surrender or rehome. And there's really not a lot of good existing support for those types of cases. Online can be great, but it can also be a train wreck.
Yeah.
And for those clients in particular, trying to find someone to help them navigate those choices
Mhm.
for their animal and for themselves, there's very, very, really very limited options. So
Yeah.
I felt like doing pet death doula work filled that gap in my behavior practice.
Mhm.
And I secretly was hoping that it would help me when the time came to say goodbye to Boo Boo, that I would be a little bit better prepared
Yeah.
for that. So
Yeah.
we ended up losing her 6.5 months ago. It was a very big loss. I'm still struggling with that. And that's why I've been sort of very open and transparent about it on my blog. And the
Yeah.
feedback I've gotten from documenting my own struggles with grief have gotten really amazing responses from clients and people just thanking me for being so open and really connecting with people on that sort of level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that you talked a little bit about, well, first of all, um, I think most people that get in our line of work have done so with because they have gone through some type of experience or are facing an experience of loss or death and dying. And I know, like, I especially started my grief training work because of, I went through a lot of griefs and I had a lot of disenfranchised grief that I didn't understand was
Hmm.
grief. And
Hmm.
learning it kind of helped me heal too. So I
Hmm.
I appreciate that about you. But I love that you brought up the stigma about behavioral euthanasia.
Hmm.
And I'm a cat mom. I have been a cat mom for so long, and I'm on some different Facebook groups and other social media. Like there's another group I'm in on a different website, for pet cat owners, right? And
Hmm.
there's always that person that is struggling with a behavioral issue, and they just get to that point where like, should I just euthanize my cat? And it's 90% of people, how dare you? What is wrong with
Hmm.
you? You got this cat, it's your problem now. And like this
Right.
attitude of you're a terrible human being for this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just, there's really not a lot of other options. I know, like,
Hmm.
I personally have known people who have had to do that because they had an aggressive dog, and you're familiar with this. And there's no rehoming aggressive dogs. You take it to a
Right.
shelter, you surrender it somewhere, and they're going to euthanize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
there's sort of this myth of the magical dog sanctuary, like where we can just send the dogs and they'll live their life happy on a farm somewhere. And there are places that exist that label themselves sanctuaries, but if you do any sort of deep dive into it, and I do have a blog post on this called The Myth of the Dog Sanctuary, that most of those places are really just warehousing these dogs and they don't have a good quality of life. They're not
yeah.
getting human interaction. They're not getting interactions with their own species. They're being
Right.
deprived, they're being socially isolated. Yes, they're on a farm technically, but it's not this idyllic life that people think of when they think of a
Yeah.
dog living on a farm. And
Yeah.
so usually people end up in that situation because they can't personally come to terms with the fact that behavioral euthanasia is sometimes the most humane option for that
Yeah.
animal. That if, and I think there's a similar connection between recognizing animals struggle with mental health issues, just
Mhm.
like humans struggle with mental health issues. And there's a stigma around that with humans, and the invisible illness that you can be suffering as a human with some sort of mental illness, and you don't get the recognition that someone who has cancer or who has some
Right.
other physical, like tangible physical thing, gets sympathy and gets, more understanding for those types of things. And there's been a shift in the human healthcare about
Mhm.
reframing that in a sense, but I think we are not quite there with animals yet. And it's hard
Right.
for people to understand that an aggressive dog is a fearful dog that's rooted in, maybe their brain chemicals are not balanced.
Mhm.
Maybe they had a traumatic incident during their formative critical socialization window when they were a baby puppy. And
Yeah.
sometimes, despite what some rescues, push, oh, save them all, sometimes we just can't save them all. And it's
Right.
not the most humane option.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard and it's sad. And again, there's the stigma behind it. And if I feel like everybody deserves a little bit of grace when they have to make these decisions, because I can't
Mhm.
fathom. I'm sure there are people out there who are like, I don't like this dog anymore. I'm going to put it down. Right. I have no doubt that happens. But like, I had to rehome a cat, and I still grieve. I get to visit the cat at least
Mhm.
because somebody I know has him, but because of behavioral issues. And it was
Mhm.
traumatic for me because I felt like a
Yeah.
failure. And
Mhm.
there are a lot of like, well, you took this on and
Mhm.
you should just buck up and deal with it. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And, maybe there is a very small percentage of people like what you're talking about, but generally speaking, behavioral euthanasia is not a decision of convenience. It's not,
exactly.
this dog is inconvenient, this cat is inconvenient, so I'm going to euthanize them. This is decision that families are struggling with.
Hmm.
They're doing medication, they're doing management, they're doing all these things, and the human's quality of life is being impacted in addition to the animal's quality of life. And that's something that I really focus on when I have a client navigating that the human's quality of life is just as important as the animal's quality of
Yeah.
life when I'm talking to those people. And, if they are prisoners to their own home, before I was a trainer, we had our first dog together as adults, was an aggressive dog. I didn't know what to do. He bit 7 people, but we were an adult only household. We decided just to manage it, and he lived out his life. He had a seizure, and that's what ended up causing his death. Um, but I didn't know what we were doing. I wasn't a trainer. We were 20 something year old kids. And we were prisoners to our home. He couldn't go anywhere. We really couldn't have people come over unless he was put away, and our lives revolved around him. And when he passed away and we decided to get Mr. Barbo, our vet, they called our vet for a reference, and she said, they have paid their dues, give them an easy dog.
Oh,
Because we had lived for 11 years with this aggressive dog, and we couldn't go on vacation together. My husband and I couldn't go on vacation together because one of us always had to be with the dog because he couldn't be safely boarded or left with anyone other than one of us. So
yeah.
for more than a decade, we didn't go on vacation together. We went separately.
Yeah.
And so everything about our life was re- structured around keeping the dog safe and keeping everyone else safe.
Yeah.
And if I were my client now and that person came to me, that would have been a very different conversation.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that too. Like, yes, the human, the owner's quality of life is important as well. And that was something I've noticed. I've just resigned to the fact that I'm never going to have a normal cat. People get cat. We've always had cats because we travel a lot. You can leave them for 2 or 3 days. And I've just
Hmm.
never had a cat that I can do that. I have to hire a pet sitter. And
Mm-hmm.
I've resigned myself to that. But especially with my last cat, my soul cat, she was had a lot of medications, and it was just we couldn't both leave the house. Like one of
Mm-hmm.
us could leave and go out of town for a couple days, or the other one, but it was really
Mm-hmm.
hard to get because she was fearful. She didn't like anybody, and
Mm-hmm.
she would hiss at people and hide, and she was just so old and decrepit. I felt terrible. So I it got to a point where the choice we made to euthanize her was not all that. She was very sickly, so it was not, difficult for
Mm-hmm.
us. But I am curious though, like I mentioned she had a lot of fear and she did not like men. Any men that came
Mm-hmm.
over the house, she really didn't like. Women she was comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was nervous when the vet came over to have her to euthanize her, and it was a male vet, and I was like, oh God, how is this going to go? And she had no issue with him whatsoever. It was like
Mm-hmm.
she accepted what was happening and accepted this man, and I've never seen her like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if things like this happen with some of the pets you have helped people facilitate their end of life. Does that
Mm-hmm.
fearfulness and aggression go away, or is it there all the way up to the end?
You know, there's something called learned helplessness. So when I have a really aggressive dog, sometimes people will say, "Oh, he's fine at the vet. It's so weird. He's fine at the vet." And
Hmm.
this concept of learned helplessness is the idea that when an animal knows that there's nothing they can do to get out of that scary situation, they just sort of surrender and give up. So if we think about in nature documentaries, you see the, you know, animal trying to cross the river that's full of crocodiles, and the crocodile reaches up and grabs the animal, and they struggle to try to get away for a couple of seconds, and then they realize this is a lost cause, and they just surrender, they give up, they stop fighting. And so there may be that element of sort of learned helplessness of I know I can't get out of this situation. But
Yeah.
when they're at end of life, it may also be they just don't have it in them anymore. And they might still be a little fearful, but they know, I'm not feeling well. This is sort of the end. And if we do it at home, especially for cats, it's a more comfortable environment for them. I know it's not possible all of the time, but
Yeah.
whenever it is possible to try to do an at-home euthanasia, that's always my preference because it gives us control. It gives us the
Yeah.
ability to have family present or not, especially when there's kids involved. Sometimes kids
Mhm.
are curious but conflicted, and so they want to be there, but maybe they don't want to be right on top of it happening. And so sometimes doing it at home gives that child the choice whether to be there or not, or just to kind of peek in from around the corner, or to sit on the stairs and listen to what's happening in the living room. So, if you're doing it in a vet office, the child has to commit, yes, I'm going, or no, I'm not going.
Right.
And then if they get there and they get freaked out, then they go out into the waiting room, and then one of the adults has to go out in the waiting room, and then the adult is missing being there for those
Yeah.
last moments of the pet. So at home euthanasia is always my preference whenever that's possible. And
Hmm.
with cats, they don't like leaving their comfortable territory.
Oh yeah.
So it's just a lower stress situation for everyone. So that's always my preference for that. But I do think, animals, they get to that point in life and they can't tell us, I'm done. I just want to go in peace. But, maybe there is that element of sort of knowing that this is the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree, and I knew when the time was going to come with my cat that I wanted to do at home, and I researched well ahead of time so I know
Hmm.
who and where could do it, and when. But she, like you said, cats especially don't like. She did not like to leave the house.
Hmm.
Any trip to the vet was just pure trauma for everybody.
Hmm. Right.
So
Yeah.
it worked. I'm glad that that's a service that exists.
It
I'm
is.
grateful for that.
Yeah, one of the other resources I have on my website that I put together is essentially the pet version of a living will. So a companion animal
Yeah.
directive, advanced care directive. And it gets people because I really want to open conversation. So when Barbara and Boo Boo both were nearing their end, my husband and I had clearly had conversations about what we were willing to do and put them through, what we were not willing to put them through, what we wanted to do at the end, where we wanted to do it. We had a mobile when we moved where we are, we got a mobile vet with the intention of knowing we have 2 senior dogs. They're going to die here. We want to have a mobile vet so that when that time comes, she can come to the house and do that for us. And so we had all these conversations, and I put that resource together because a lot of my clients, not only are they struggling with the idea of losing their animal, they're struggling with sort of infighting in the family because everyone's not on the same page about what should happen with the animal or what treatments. Should we do chemo? Should we do radiation? Should we put them on all these medications? Or should we just keep them comfortable and have a shorter period of time, but a better quality of life? And so I put together this resource to get people to start these conversations early, even as young puppies. When I have puppy clients, I will present this and say, I know it's a puppy, but accidents happen. Dogs get out, they get hit by cars. Young dogs can get cancer, they get mast cell tumors, things happen. And you want to have a conversation with your partner or your family or your kids about what we're willing to put the animal through, what our financial resources are for long caretaking. When Barbo was dying, he had sort of a long, prolonged decline, whereas Boo Boo was fairly short. Hers was less than a month. And Barbo, same as your cat, he was on medication 5 times a day. So our schedule was completely around his medication schedule. And towards the last couple of weeks, he was very anxious. And when he got anxious, he needed to be comforted. And my husband and I both work at home. And it got to the point where we were blocking out our calendars so that we never had overlapping appointments, because if Barbara got anxious, one of us needed to be available. So that was a financial hit for us because we were scaling back our client services, and we weren't both able to bring in as much money as we could because we needed to comfort the dog. And it's not something that I regret at all, but not every family may be able to do that. And so not just what medical procedures are you willing to do or not do, but talking about the disruption in your household when you have a dying pet, disruption to sleep, disruption to being available. If you have kids, like, you might not be able to go to a soccer game because you have to be home for the dog or the cat. And those choices, those decisions are better to be talked about and be prepared for when you're not making rush, emotional, in the heat of the moment decisions.
Thank you. You sound just like me.
My nightmare, my literal nightmare, I have nightmares that wake me up, is euthanizing an animal in the middle of the night at the emergency room. Is just, I cannot imagine a worse scenario. You're panicked. If you have kids, you're like, someone has to stay home with the kids, or you have to wake the kids up to bring them to the emergency room. And you're making these emotional, financial decisions about what is supposed to be in your pet's best interest, while the emergency room is like, you have to make this decision in the next 30 seconds or he's going to die. And I don't want anyone to be in that position. If we plan ahead a little bit and have these conversations, then at least okay, we've talked about this. We're not doing chemo. We're not going to do that. Boo Boo was 15 and a half when she passed away. She died the day after her 15 and a half birthday. She had a tumor. We think she had a tumor behind her eye. We don't know for sure because we had decided at 15 and a half, we're not going to put her through an MRI. She probably wouldn't survive the sedation of an MRI. And so we don't know 100%, but she had a seizure. She had never had a seizure. Her eye was seeping. The vet said, I think there's a tumor behind her eye in her brain, and that's what's causing this. And she had the neurological symptoms that would be consistent with that. So John and I weren't infighting. We weren't having disagreements about, I want to do an MRI. No, I don't think we should do that, because we had these conversations long in advance of the vet saying, I think she has a tumor. And we said, okay, we're going to keep her comfortable for as long as we can. And when the time is the time, that's what we're going to do. So having those conversations and being prepared, even if you have a young, healthy animal, is really, really important, because accidents do happen, and people lose their jobs if someone in your primary breadwinner loses their job, financially, how are you going to be able to care for this animal? So
Right.
really thinking about everything that goes into pet care.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I really push is including your animal in your own personal end of life information.
Yes.
So one of my
Thank
blog
you.
posts is what if your animal outlives you? So I see tons. We are a big foster family, so we're deeply ingrained in sort of the rescue and sheltering world as well. And I see so many animals being surrendered because someone goes into assisted living or they die and they have assumed that their children or their friend is just going to take their dog or cat. And that doesn't always happen. And
Right.
it's really not great to just assume that that's going to happen. Those are more conversations that need to happen ahead of
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And so planning for what will happen if something happens to you, if you're in a car accident and you die, or you're elderly and you are moving into assisted living, what is the plan for your animal?
Yeah.
And shaming people for not taking their mother's cat is not the solution, because that person, that child, didn't bring the cat into their home. They weren't planning on doing that. So assuming that they're just going to get saddled with that animal because a parent can't take care of that animal is not an appropriate, you know, solution. So we
Hard
need to
agree.
talk to elderly people if they're moving into assisted living and figure out a solution before we're at the 11th hour and grandma's going to assisted living tomorrow and now
Right.
it's going to happen to Fluffy.
Yeah.
Um, and people don't like to think about that because it's thinking about our own inability to care for our animals. We're
Yep.
losing our own independence. There's lots of big feelings around those topics. But if we are a pet owner, we have a responsibility to plan for their care until the end of their life, whatever
Yes.
that's going to look like.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for bringing up all of that because when I work with any of my clients, my human clients, if they have a pet, that's one of the check things on my checklist is all right, what are we going to do? And I have like things they can fill out with, their personal, like, where's this? Where's this? What's going to happen with this outside of the usual? And I put stipulations in my wills about what to do with my pets. But and I also have one of my workbooks, there's a little card I made in the back that you can put in your wallet. It says, I have a pet that's home alone.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody has an accident and out, and so somebody knows there's a pet here, here's who to call, here's what the pet is, what's the
Yep.
plan. But yes, having those conversations, oh my God, I say that all the time. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
important for humans and for pets, no
Right.
matter how old you are. If there's a hill I have to die on, it's going to be fill out a living will.
Yep.
As
Yep.
soon as you're 18, you fill that out.
Yep.
I
Absolutely.
don't care if you're the
Yep.
healthiest human being known to man.
Exactly.
Accidents
Yep.
happen.
Yep. And
But
making sure, in my advanced care directive, like making sure someone has keys to your house, because if you
yeah,
are in a car accident, even if you're in the hospital just for a single night, that animal needs to get out. That animal needs to have
yeah.
their litter box clean. They have to get fed. Someone has to have keys to your house, the code to your alarm.
Mhm.
They need to know what your animal's schedule is for feeding and medication. So we want to keep this in updated, and we want to keep it in a designated spot.
Yep.
If you live in an evacuation, so we live in hurricane country right now. So if you have a go bag, you want to make sure that all that information's in your go bag in the event that, you need to get up and go. There's a hurricane, you're being evacuated, or, I do boarding for animals. So if we have to evacuate, I need to bring that animal with me. I need vaccine records. I need everything to be able to safely take that animal with us
Mhm.
to wherever we're going to end up if we're being evacuated.
Right. Right. And yeah, I cannot stress enough how having a plan, even if not a fully hashed out every detail plan, just have some conversations like, all right, what do we think we might want to do? But having, yeah, like I said, on that card you could put in your wallet. It's like, here's the person to call. They have a key, they have a code, the whole thing's taken care of.
Right.
So
Yep.
um I'm curious, I had a thought earlier about working with pets at end of life and euthanasia. I did an episode a while ago about pets and pet loss and grief around pets. And I feel like I deal with this with my human clients, and I've seen this with people who have older pets or sick pets, that they're kind of looking for just validation to make that decision. And I always say, unless something inciting has happened, there's no like, look for this and then this is the decision you make. This happens, you make this decision. There's no, it's so gray. And I feel like a lot of times when people come to me for themselves or for their, maybe their pets, like they're kind of just looking for permission to let go. So do you
Yeah,
see a lot of
sometimes
that
they
too?
are. One of the things I do with my NLS clients is lots of quality of life skills. So if we're in sort of the anticipatory grief phase, we know that Fluffy's getting older, we know that Fluffy has cancer, we know there's something wrong and there's going to be a decline. I will have clients fill out quality of life scales or questionnaires at regular intervals so that we have some data and we can compare and say, okay, 2 months ago, this is what it looked like. Now this is what it looks like. We're seeing some decline in activity and eating and drinking, in socialization, and all of these things. If there is more than one person in the home, I will have those people fill out those quality of life scales separately, because sometimes there is different interpretations of how Fluffy
Yeah.
is doing. And then that's a conversation that if they're not on the same page and one thinks Fluffy's doing amazing and the other's like, no, Fluffy's really struggling, then we need to reconcile those differences. We need to, there might be some denial, there might be some, you know, I get a lot of clients, but he's still eating. And I say, well, eating isn't the only marker
Yeah.
of quality of life.
Yeah.
Barbo ate literally until his last breath. He was scarfing down peanut butter cups and steak you know, and so eating is not the only measure of quality of life. And I think people hone in on that. So I have people talk about, you know, what is your animal's favorite thing to do? For us, Barbo loved car rides, and we knew when he was resistant to get into the car, or if he got in and he wasn't like sticking his head out the window and he was just like, okay, this is fine, we're doing this, but he wasn't like excited about it. We knew that was a quality of life marker for us because he loved car rides.
Hmm.
And so if your animal normally greets you at the door when you come home and now they're just laying in their bed and they sort of lift their head up like, oh, hey, you're home, that's great, but they don't get up and they don't do the activities that they used to do, those are indicators of quality of life. That's, and naturally we want to hold on to, but he's still eating, or but he at
I
least he
know.
lifted his head when I came up. We want to grab onto those positives, but helping people work through those quality of life scales, I think, is really some sort of independent data that we can look at. So we're trying to take the emotion out of it a little bit
Yeah.
and really look at the facts of eating, drinking, socialization, seeking out attention, playing, mobility, all of these things. And then also the human's quality of life, like I was talking about
Mhm.
before. If that medication schedule is 5 or 6 times a day, how is that affecting your ability to go out
Yeah.
and socialize, go out to dinner, go out and have a date night? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you able to caretake for yourself while you're caretaking for a very sick animal?
Mhm.
And so we have all of these conversations. So there is some gray area to what you're talking about, but I
Right.
do think we can look at it from more of a sort of data
Yeah,
driven
absolutely.
perspective and try to take some of that emotion out of it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And like I'm glad you brought up the eating because that was the big sign when my cat was ready is she just kind of stopped eating. But
Mhm.
then her last day, like I said, I wanted to make her last couple days like the best. So I was giving her whatever she wanted. She loved chicken, she loved tuna,
Mhm.
and she just wolfed that down like it was no like like it was
Yeah.
our last meal because it kind of was.
Yeah.
My husband was like, "Oh, well, she's eating again. Maybe she's on an upswing." And I was like,
Yeah.
it was so hard to just say because I wanted to believe that too, but I knew I was like, she's
Yeah.
just this is her rally, this is her treat, but
Mhm.
this it's time. It's past
Yeah.
time. Her quality of life
Yeah.
is not good anymore. She could barely
Yep.
walk by that point. So,
Right. Yep.
well, thank you for that and for giving us, grace and permission and, all around pet end of life. So, um, is there anything else you would like to add or, that you haven't covered yet?
Not really, just really encouraging people to have those open dialogues and to plan and to not make, as much as possible to not make these heated decisions in big emotional moments. So any sort of advanced planning or conversations you can have is the best.
Yes.
There is stuff that similar to human end of life, planning memorialization and tributes and how we want to, leave a legacy of this animal. So we knew we wanted to do nose prints with Boo Boo. So that
Oh,
required planning ahead to order the ink print kits, so that when she got euthanized, we had that there. I've had a couple of felted, so I had this little heart felted out of her
oh.
fur. So that required making sure we had enough undercoat to be able to send the Etsy seller to be able to felt the heart. So
Hmm.
thinking about how you may want to memorialize or remember your animal so that you have the fur clippings or the paw prints or whatever it is that you want to do. Involving kids is a whole separate probably podcast, but
Oh yeah.
how kids want to remember their animals, what they want. Maybe they write a letter, maybe
Mm.
they, there's lots of things that we can do with kids to help prepare them. I have a blog post coming up on pet loss and kids in the next couple of
Oh,
weeks.
yay.
Probably by this podcast once this podcast is live, it will probably be out already.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other topic about involving kids, and parents naturally want to shelter their kids from sadness and from loss. And I think the complete opposite. I think it's important to
Totally agree.
involve them and to show your own sadness and emotion in front of your kids. You don't want to be this stoic parent that never cries, because then what are we teaching kids? We're teaching kids that they shouldn't show their emotions. These are life skills that these kids are going to carry into adulthood. And if I am a parent and I'm sad and I'm crying about the dog dying, kids are learning, oh, adults cry too. It's okay to be sad. It's
Mhm.
okay to show that emotion. And so having those open conversations and saying, I really miss Boo Boo too. It's okay,
Mhm.
if you want to cry.
Yeah.
So involving kids and not sheltering them. It doesn't have to be gruesome, but explaining to them what's happening and avoiding euphemisms. We don't want to say,
Mhm. Yeah.
Fluffy's going to a farm or Fluffy's going to get some special medicine,
Oh my
because then
God.
what happens when your kid goes to the doctor and the doctor says, we're going to give you some special medicine?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
oh my gosh, like that kid is going to be terrified.
Yeah.
Or we're just going to put Fluffy into a really deep sleep and then you
Nope.
expect the kid to go to bed that night?
Nope.
Like, no. So avoiding euphemisms, like there's so many important things that I can help families navigate, especially if they have kids. And maybe families do want to do sort of that bucket list for the animal, and the kids
Yeah.
can be involved in that. We did that definitely with Barbara. We gave him last good like 48 hours. Boo Boo was really more of we did take her out and do something. She got ice cream for breakfast and things like that, but she was really much more a snuggler and a homebody. But planning that bucket list at the end, the kids
Yeah.
can be involved in that. There's so many things. So even thinking about, all right, we're going to plan the euthanasia. What do we want to do leading up to the euthanasia? And how are we going to memorialize or have a shrine, or what are we going to do
Mhm.
after the animal is gone? Are we burying them in the backyard? Are we getting them cremated? I got a cremation ring made out of the ashes with Barbara and Boo Boo. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but that
Oh, oh, I love it.
orange and diamond ring. So
Oh.
Barbo is the orange stones and Boo Boo's the diamond stones. And so there's a person who
Mhm.
you send them some cremation ashes
Yep.
and they put them into the stones.
Yeah.
And so there are different ways that we can keep our animals with us after they're
Mhm.
gone, but some of that does require planning if you're going
Yeah.
to do, you know, fur clippings or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
So again, having conversations about how we want to memorialize and pay tribute and honor our animals. So it just requires some forethought and some
It
planning.
does.
So
It does.
that's
And
really
yeah, you don't
that's
want to
that's
make,
the hill I die on, is have these conversations.
yes. Thank God, you sound just like me. Now it's like we're death doulas. What?
Oh, yeah, go figure.
All right. Well, I have a little tradition at the end of my episodes where I pull a random card from the death deck and it has a conversation starter type question, icebreaker question about death and dying. And then you will answer it and then I will answer it. So I'm pulling at random. And oh, well, this is easy.
Oh, good.
Talking
I wasn't
about
prepared.
dying and my own mortality, A, reminds me to appreciate the life and time I have. B isn't my first choice, but I do contemplate it. Or C is literally the last subject I would ever care to discuss.
That's an A.
Yep. Yep. Same here. I was going to say in this crowd, I think that's an easy question.
Yeah. Yep.
I always encourage, I have this words. I host a monthly death cafe here in Columbus, Ohio. And I think just death cafes are amazing because it's a great opportunity to have these conversations without the stigma, without the worrying of being judged or any of that. So awesome.
Yeah.
Kate, well, this has been amazing. I'm going to give you a minute. Please tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find this amazing blog you've been referencing, because I'm going to go check it out and sign up for your newsletter.
So my main website is rescuedbytraining.com, and at the top you'll see a link for the blog. You can read. I've got almost 4 years of weekly blog posts there, so there's a lot of content there. Also at the top you'll see a link for free downloads, and that is where you will find the Advanced Care Directive, as well as my guide for people who are considering behavioral euthanasia, rehoming, or surrendering. There's a 15-page guide or something like that to help people, make sure they're sort of checking off all the things before they arrive at that decision. Through my services tab, you can book death doula sessions or a specific session if you're thinking about behavioral euthanasia. I have a dedicated session just for that. Or if you are looking for behavioral training, I have sessions available for that, obviously. On social media, I am on Facebook and Instagram, Rescued by Training. I do a weekly blog post, and then that gets pushed out to social media as well as blog or social media content related to that topic every week. So I usually am posting 3 or 4 times a week, and then I have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for also on my website.
That's awesome. I'm going to go sign up for the newsletter for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank
Kate,
you
this
for having me. It's been great.
I cannot thank you enough for coming on and talking all about this amazing subject. Pets are amazing. Pets are great.
Yep, they're part of our family.
And 100%. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Another big shout out and thank you to Kate for coming on my show and sharing all about her work as not just a dog trainer, but a pet death doula and her passion for animals. And it's obvious. It's palpable. I don't know. It's very apparent when you talk with her just how passionate she is about what she does and just how much she loves those doggos. And she's just an amazing human being. Check out her website. I put links to everything in the description below. So don't forget to go check her out and say hello. Sign up for her newsletter. And if you want to come see anything of mine, you can find me. My website is nikkithedeathdoula.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Nikki the Death Doula. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts about the show, that'd be great. You can also, even better, leave a rating or a review. That's the best way for people to find this podcast. If you really love it, make sure you do that. Or tell a friend. Send somebody my way. Say, hey, I got this really awesome podcast by this totally adorable lady in Ohio who's a death doula. So that would be like the best thing you can do is just tell a friend. I work really hard at this podcast. I don't get a penny out of it. I do have my patrons, which is amazing, but I don't have ads and I probably won't. It's hard to get them anyway. The stipulation for getting ads is ridiculous, but even so, I don't feel like I need that. Would extra money be great? Sure. But that's not why I do this podcast. I do this podcast because I care about the content. I care about you all, and I am passionate about what I do. So if you can just spread the word to other people and let them know about this podcast, that'd be awesome. And again, leave a rating and review. Super simple. All right, everybody. Thank you so much again for tuning in this week. And remember, as always, your grief is yours. Your feelings are valid. Grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula is produced by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC in Columbus, Ohio. Nikki the Death Doula LLC is for consulting, education, emotional support, and guidance, and is no way considered a funeral establishment or licensed mental health establishment. Scripts, editing, sound design, literally everything with this podcast is done solely by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC, with the exception of the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. Licensing information can be found at filmmusic.io.